The photograph lives in a paper mount the color of old cream, its corners rounded by decades of being slid out for company and slid back for safekeeping. A gilt rule makes a thin frame within the thicker one, and just under the bottom edge of the image, in neat gold stamping, the studio has signed its name, Alder & Son, Photographic Rooms, Market Street. On the back, in pencil that still holds a little shine, someone, my great-grandmother I think, has written Norris, June 1903. Her hand is steady, though the second zero in 1903 is darker than the others, as if she went over it again to be sure time would not rub it out. The surface, albumen paper with the faintest eggshell sheen, makes its own weather. You tilt it and light gathers in certain places, and not others. The father's collar, the glass of a frame on the mantel, the bow near a child's ear. The portrait appears exactly as you expect a family in 1903 to appear, if you have learned your expectations from parlor novels and respectable sermons. The father stands, one hand on the back of the chair where his wife sits, a position that makes him look both protective and prepared. He wears a coat that fits like a promise, and a tie that knows it has been tied before by a surer hand. The mother sits composed, spine obedient to the notion of good posture, hair pinned in the low, anchoring way that makes the head feel less likely to fly off in a high wind of household tasks. In her lap, an infant bundled in a white dress full of soft storms of cloth. To her left, a boy of 8 or 9. To her right, a girl a year or two older, ribbon acting as truce between order and hair. If you stop there, this is what the picture gives you. Peace. The kind of peace that has nothing to do with ease and everything to do with people agreeing together, for the length of a shutter's breath, to make the world look as if it has done them no harm. The boy's shoes shine past their age. The girl's dress has been let down and then down again. You can see the ghost of a hem at her shins, a neat, pale horizon. The father's jaw wants to be soft but does not remember how. The mother's mouth keeps its secret without looking coy. The room itself helps with the illusion. It is their parlor, not a studio's pretend Rome. A mantel runs the width of the wall behind them, topped by a mirror in a walnut frame carved into leaf and twist. The mirror holds the room like a breath. The ceiling's plaster medallion, the curve of the Gacelier's arms, the edge of the doorway to the hall, the suggestion of a fern whose fronds have learned the discipline of early summer. It catches and doubles everything that is well behaved. You can look at this portrait for years, as we did, and see only what it asks you to see. Then one evening you set it beneath a lamp because you are hunting for something you cannot name, and the mirror, which has kept its counsel so politely, becomes the most talkative thing in the frame. It is not the furniture the mirror reveals, not the ceiling rosette nor the fern. It is the space just behind the mother's shoulder, where the reflected edge of the chair should be and yet also is not. From the chair's reflection there rises a thin, dark rod, no thicker than a pencil, curving to a padded crescent that hovers behind the infant's fine hair like a parenthesis. Behind that, farther back in the mirror's small world, a figure of a young man leans, one hand extended in a careful, almost prayerful angle. His face is half gone in shadow, but the shape of concentration is unmistakable. Near his elbow sits a table on which, plain and unadorned, a little stand has been placed. Upon it, at the exact height of the baby's shoulder, a lace handkerchief folded over something more practical than pretty, a piece of soft felt, perhaps, or flannel, meant to stand between equipment and skin. Once you have seen that crescent behind the child's head, you cannot unsee the line beneath the blanket, where a wooden support likely makes itself useful. You cannot unsee the strap, not rope, not ribbon, but something in between, threaded near the mother's wrist under the bundle, the way a parent threads their finger under a newborn's arm to keep it from slipping without making the hold look like a hold. You cannot unsee the little bottle on the mantel, half concealed behind a frame, its label turned slightly toward the glass. Someone with a better command of the 19th century than I would have noticed it in an instant. Laudanum, in slanted type, with the apothecary's name flourishing beneath. The mirror pronounces it, sideways, without apology. Peace changes once the mirror begins to speak. The photograph does not stop being beautiful. It stops being harmless. Their names were Thomas and Evelyn Norris. He kept books for the ironworks down by the river, where men and ore and reputation learned to balance each other day after day. She kept a ledger of different sums: soap, bread, candles, school fees, the arithmetic of borrowed sugar and returned favors that made the household stand up and nod when necessary. The girl is Clara, ribbons reluctant but outnumbered. The boy is Samuel, hair slicked flat as a principal. The infant is Rose. I did not know any of this until the photograph taught me where to look. Objects keep secrets politely until you put your finger on the right glass. In June of 1903, the city decided to steam in place. People on Market Street carried handkerchiefs the way soldiers carry maps and used them as often. Flies insisted on being counted. Milk soured faster than mothers could scold it. Children invented new ways to be hot and new games for end-of-day breezes, catching shadows, chasing the wardrobe's smell of varnish against a storm's first breath, listening for ice wagons as if miracles had bells on. The Norrises had just finished unfolding the summer curtains when Rose took fever. "Teeth," the neighbor said, fluttering into the kitchen with a pie and a confidence the pie could not persuade. "They make them burn and then settle." The midwife, Mrs. Keene, who had caught Clara and then, in a maneuver of skill and patience that had become neighborhood legend, coaxed Samuel to turn. Thought so too. She sat on the bed and taught Evelyn to bind a cloth around the little head and bathe wrists and ankles. Thomas fetched ice. He carried it as if delicacy were a weight one could train for. Rose burned anyway. The fever did what summer fevers do when milk turns and flies win. By Thursday, she slept too much, a sleep not like sweetness, but like stubbornness. By Friday, the doctor, a serious man named Harrow, who had never learned the trick of pretending to be more certain than he was, pressed 2 fingers to the small wrist and looked not at the baby, but at the mother. And when he looked, sorrow doused the room the way a bucket will. He set his bag down and took out the tonic most men carry for other people's grief. "There is a thing that will quiet her," he said. Evelyn, who had grown the muscle that lifts a house with gentle words and folded towels, shook her head. "Quiet is what I fear," she said. "I know," Harrow said. He was not a cruel man. He knew too much for that. He opened the bag. He drew out the brown bottle that photographs do not intend to capture and mirrors cannot resist. "You must rest," he told her. "She must rest. A little. It will make the edges kinder. And it will help you hold her as long as you need." It was too much kindness. It arrived too late. It arrived exactly on time to do a different sort of work. On Saturday night, Thomas walked to the studio on Market Street because a decision had to be made, and men in charge of ore often prefer to consult people who harness light. Alder and Son had a reputation for decency. They had dressed soldiers for their return to other men's mantles during the war. They had helped shopkeepers look like the registers they wanted to be associated with. They had photographed infants since there had been infants in this city, and 24 times, if their ledger is to be believed, they had made likenesses of children after those children had decided the air did not suit them. There are men who will condemn a household for that, with phrases they mistake for virtue: morbid habit, unhealthy clinging, obscene refusal to let God have what God has taken. Ignore them. The business of love is to keep, and keeping is a craft that must learn tools. In 1903, one of those tools was a studio where gentlemen made silver remember. Alder, senior, listened with his big hands quiet on the counter. "We can come to your parlor," he said, "which keeps the sort of quiet a mother prefers." Thomas swallowed and nodded. "We should do it in the morning," Alder said. "Cooler then. Better for everything." Better for nothing, Thomas thought. But he said yes, because being able to agree is often the only skill a day permits. In their parlor at 10 o'clock, Alder and son came in with the hush of men entering a church outside of service. The young man in the mirror is the son, Nathan, 20 perhaps, with a tie too narrow and good intentions too broad. He set their plank carefully on the floor, and then a table near the mantel, and he moved as if each piece of furniture had a heart that must not be bruised. Alder, senior, greeted Evelyn without querying whether greeting was welcome, and she returned the nod because there are rituals that stave off collapse, even when they do nothing to cure it. Clara and Samuel were instructed with the kind voice of an uncle who does not own the day, but has persuaded it not to run away. "Here for you, just so," Alder said to Clara, touching a safe inch of chair to show her where to stand, and to Samuel, "Square your shoulders like the men you intend to become boys will straighten for almost any older male ghost they think they can grow into." He put Thomas behind Evelyn and did not set a headrest there because men's necks behave when grief occupies them. He looked at the baby and looked away and then back. He had done this before and hated it each time the way a decent man hates discovering he is good at something he despises. Nathan went to the mantel and, without touching it, removed from its edge the frame that sat at the corner. "It will glare," he said, and smiling very slightly to make the offense look like usefulness, he set the frame against the wall instead, revealing behind it the little bottle Dr. Harrow had left. The label faced out, as if someone might need to read it in a hurry. They worked quickly, as ministers do when they know the words by heart, but wish to keep them fresh. Nathan placed the support behind the chair, the thin curved rod topped by its padded crescent, and brought it forward in a bright arc until it hovered behind Rose's soft head. He hid it with fabric. He cushioned it with a lace handkerchief that had been laid ready for such a use, because women invent tenderness for contraptions men would otherwise make too honest. Evelyn slipped her forearm beneath the baby's dressing, and in that grandmotherly trick taught to new mothers at the first bath and never unlearned, supported what the apparatus could not be trusted to know how to hold. "She's sleeping," Clara whispered, her voice equal parts wonder and order. "She is very good." Evelyn did not correct her. She had never been required to teach the distinction between rest and departure in such a small space before. It is not a distinction anyone should have to explain to a child on a Tuesday. Alder made the picture. He did the thing you can see in the mirror, set the plate in the holder, breathed, moved the cap with the steady speed of a man not tempted to hurry past the ordinary sadness of the world. He did it twice, then 3 times, then nodding as if refusing to apologize to the room for being competent at sorrow, did it once more. Between the 3rd and the 4th exposure, Nathan reached from beyond the frame to steady the dress's hem, and you can see in the mirror his hand lifted like a blessing, held just short of contact. You can imagine, if you wish, the warmth of it near cloth that had cooled. You can see the band of the crescent's padding peeking where the lace had slipped. You can see the grown men deciding which things to pretend not to notice for the sake of the picture's argument. When the plates were done and wrapped and carried away into the small travelling vault Alder used when Holmes insisted on remembering themselves in their own air, Evelyn asked for a minute. The family withdrew to the kitchen, where water and bread and the business of being alive waits for no photograph. The mother stayed in the parlor with Rose. She held her as any mother holds a sleeping child, like a secret. It is not fair, what was asked of her that day. It is not fair, and because fairness is seldom an argument that persuades weather or time, no one made it at the moment aloud. She sat on the chair. She looked into the mirror at the woman looking into the mirror, She saw there not a tremor, but a shore. I do not know how long she took. The mirror did not learn to keep time that day. It learned to keep stillness. When the little coffin arrived, a white thing with a pink lining, the sort of detail that drives a certain kind of tough-mouthed person into the yard to curse air, they set it on the table beneath the mirror for an hour, while Mrs. Keene tied ribbons left over from other babies' christening caps across the lid. Thomas stood at the doorway and did the job men are required to call their own, preventing a house from falling down by frowning at a spot on the floor so hard it remembers how to be floor. The elder children went to the back step to count flies and found, to their practiced astonishment, that counting briefly makes the world pause its thefts. The mirror held all of this too, but the photograph holds only the minute Alder asked it to. When my grandmother, who was Clara, wrote Norris, June 1903 on the back of the mount, she had already learned to think of the picture as a proof of family, not as an accusation of sorrow. She kept it upright in a drawer with a handful of other papers that made a life look continuous. A letter of thanks from a charity that had learned what a winter coat could do to a child's shoulders. The receipt for a piano no one in the house mastered, but everyone believed represented civilization. The clipped obituary of the doctor, who had been decent and imprecise in the same measure, required of men with bags. We looked at this portrait every Thanksgiving. It came out after the pie, when the men had gone soft and the women were determined to keep their edges. It sat on the table while people told stories in their proper order: the breadline story, the runaway horse story, the why grandfather never took to ice fishing story. No one said, "This is the baby who died." People do not say that in rooms thick with gratitude. They say it in kitchens while washing the good cups, when steam hides faces as well as mirrors do. It was my mother who finally said, in a late kitchen in summer, holding the picture not as a relic, but as a problem to be solved: "The mirror is doing something." We leaned together the way respectful thieves lean over a register they intend to admire and then leave alone. We found the crescent, we found the hand, we found the folded handkerchief. We argued over the label, laudanum, until we found in the bottom of another drawer a prescription from Harrow's office, the handwriting a careful soldier's. Tincture Opie, take 5 drops to soothe, the final E smudged, as if someone had put their finger on it and reconsidered. "Are we supposed to be angry?" I asked, in the way of children who have learned the trick of sorting their feelings into polite boxes: righteous, tender, well-informed, bitter. "We are supposed to be instructed," she said, and to do the instruction justice the way the room did, quietly. What does it instruct? That grief will use any tool at hand. That gentleness is not the same as lying. That a picture can love a person enough to tell on them a little. When I grew up and learned to love libraries, I found my way to the Alder Ledger, which the Historical Society kept in a box near the maps. It was full of names and dates and the occasional note in a square, practical hand. For June 1903, beside Norris, parlour, family, Alder had written infant portrait and, in parentheses, support. On a later line, delivered 3 cabs, his code, as the archivist explained while we stood happily in dust, for cabinet cards in mounts. There were a half-dozen other entries that season with the same modest parenthesis. That was as far as the ledger confessed. Decency and commerce run in double harness. I took a copy of the page home and slipped it under the portrait in the drawer. If you leave clean facts tucked near older grief, you learn that facts have edges and grief does not. And this is useful knowledge for anyone hoping to live kindly. Once you have seen the mirror's story, you discover that the picture is sturdier than your revelation. It does not change the faces to have a better explanation for their arrangement. It changes your face looking at them. It teaches you to be suspicious of any photograph that behaves too well. It teaches you to spend time in corners, the breath between curtain and wall, the shadow under a chair, a piece of furniture's reflection where nothing is supposed to be. It also changes the stories you tell your own house. When our son was born, he slept the ordinary sleep of infants. Shallow, fierce, convincing. When he fussed, we walked him, the way men walked babies in parlors in 1903, with a rhythm they would not have used for any other work. When our doctor, competent, overworked, understanding, offered drops with a name the pharmacy had improved, but the century had not entirely changed, I touched the edge of the bottle and then pushed it gently away. We waited instead. He cried less than I feared and more than I preferred, which is to say, perfectly. The photograph taught me another habit, how to look at our own mirrors. On days when sorrow came to our house with paperwork and insisted on being installed, I turned the frames to the wall for a while. It is permissible, I learned, to let the room keep its face to itself until it is ready to behave it again. When it was time, I turned them back, and they received us with their usual honesty. Once, in a fit of what can only be called love for people I had not met, I carried the portrait to the museum and asked the conservator, who knew albumen prints the way sailors know weather, to look with her good lamp and tell me if the crescent was truly what I thought. She adjusted the stand. She turned the light to counter the paper's gloss. She set a magnifier between her eye and the past and said, without triumph, "Posing stand." She showed me a pamphlet from 1898, Hints for the Amateur and Professional Photographic Artist, in which a gentleman with more faith than taste describes the device as the guardian of the restless head. We laughed, because libraries deserve laughter. Then she tapped the edge of the mirror in the image gently with her nail. "This is why your picture tells the truth so well," she said. "Mirrors have an immoral affection for witnesses." I asked her what she meant, and she considered. "They include," she said. "A photograph frames out the apparatus. Mirrors take revenge on restraint. We thanked the mirror when we got home. We thanked it out loud. It seemed the sort of politeness a house appreciates." The Norrises carried on. This is what families do after a photograph has exhausted itself, saying, "Look, they went to the ironworks and to school, and to the place Clara had found she liked to bury her hands, bread dough, which respects effort when little else will." They bought a smaller bottle of laudanum later and hid it behind a different frame, and then threw it away when a different doctor, a woman, whisper it, taught Evelyn to steep chamomile and hold the cup beneath a baby's breath so the steam would make the chest remember how to behave. They had another child. They moved the piano to the other wall. They took the portrait down, once, to hang it where the afternoon would not keep finding the infant's dress and making it glow in a way that made Clara's throat ache. They put it up again when Samuel joined the fire brigade, and they needed a thing in the room that made danger look small. They let the house smile when weddings were scheduled and winter coats were fetched from trunks. They took the picture down once more when Thomas died, because men who stand with their hand on a chair back continue to live in that exact posture in a room after their coat is folded and put away. And sometimes a parlor has to be taught how to make a different shape of air. When Clara married, the portrait came with her. She did not ask permission. Certain objects move themselves. And there, in her new house, the one with narrower moldings and a window that faced a different kind of weather, the photograph learned yet another way to be useful. It trained children to look for meaning where adults have hidden it. My mother learned to examine the edges of evidence because of what the mirror made certain. She never became cruel with her knowledge. She became tender with it. When my mother was dying, on a spring day that tried very hard not to be a spring day, because the lilacs insisted, and the hospital insisted, and the two cannot be persuaded to make a kind of compassionate agreement, she asked for 3 things: the hymn with the verse about shelter, the glass of melted lemon ice she had always preferred to any respectable dessert, and the picture. We leaned together one last time, as we had leaned as children into the mirror's lesson, and she said, half to herself and half to the air that was becoming part of her, "Peace is not the lie. Peace is the pose we make to tell the truth without frightening each other to death." I did not understand her entirely then. I have understood her increasingly since. Sometimes I take the photograph out now and put it on the table and invite a friend to lean with me. I do not do this often. People deserve to discover the mirror when they are prepared to be rearranged by it. But I have learned to say, when a person says, "What a peaceful scene," 2 sentences. Yes, and look here. They bend. They find the crescent. They see the young man's lifted hand and the lace folded like a nicety begging to be useful. They take a breath that speaks both gratitude and fury. If they are my people, they do not pass judgment. They admit that love asks people to be braver than the history of furniture can justify. They bring the picture closer to their faces and let the mirror teach them where to go first in other rooms. After they leave, I put the portrait back, because its home is not the top of a stack of revelations, but the drawer where family and paper keep one another from becoming brittle. I put my palm against the drawer's wooden front the way Evelyn must have put her palm against the back of Rose's dress. The gesture is not evidence, it is posture. It is the pose we make when we intend to keep something. The mirror in the picture keeps working, whether or not anyone is looking. It continues to include what the frame politely tried to let out. It continues to insist that the apparatus matters, whether the apparatus is a crescent of padded iron, or a bottle with an apothecary's courteous lilt, or a pair of hands lifted inches from sorrow in case a touch should be required. I resist telling the photograph what to mean. I permit it to show me what is there. That is enough. The piece returns then, not simple, not naive. It wears its grief like a petticoat, visible if you look where fabric thins and light insists. It lets the father's hand be exactly where Alder placed it, on the chair that keeps the mother steady. It lets the older children hold their mouths straight like soldiers at an inspection, and then, afterwards, run scissor slicings of laughter down the hallway, because their job is also to remind the house that the heir still knows how to play. It lets the infant be what she is in the photograph, luminous, not because light made her so, but because a family agreed, once, in the ugliest hour a summer can offer, to behave as if a little girl still required a bow polished, a dress smoothed, a head supported. The mirror simply shows you what that required. This is the last thing I say to anyone who asks what is in the picture. I say, everything that was necessary. And then, if the room is the sort that forgives confession, I add, everything that is still necessary. And I point to the mirror, and I tell them they will start finding things in their own rooms they did not know were there, and that they must, when they do, be as gentle with themselves as a padded crescent. They must lift their hands and hold them near the place that needs holding, even if touch never actually happens. They must fold the lace over the useful thing. They must make peace, not as a lie, but as a staging for truth, so the people they love can survive it.